Pom, 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 pom. Dum. This was the requiem for the death of Destruction Warlock. Or at the very least, this is what some of the player base would like to believe, now that we have some severe, I guess, nerfs given to Destruction Warlock. Now, this is likely what is going to take place within the community, this type of discussion, up until the nerfs actually go live on the next reset. June 28th, June 29th, we have a set of balance tuning, a couple of tanks and a couple of ranged DPS are going to be the target, but of course the main source of discussion is going to be Destruction Warlock. So here's the nerfs for Destruction Warlock, which actually, funnily enough, is just one. It's multiple buffs and just one nerf. The one nerf to Destruction Warlock is that the 4-piece set bonus giving you Blasphemy is no longer going to work with Reign of Chaos. Now, for the players who hated Destruction Warlock but didn't quite understand the inner workings or why exactly was it doing so much damage, the reason why this happened is because Warlock has a tier set. The 4-piece set bonus of the tier set allows you every 10 soul shards to cast a free Chaos Bolt or a free Rain of Fire instant and spawn a Blasphemy. A Blasphemy is a copy of an Infernal except purple, and except of lasting 30 seconds it lasts 8. But for the rest is exactly like an Infernal. It does the same AoE damage, the same spell power scaling normal damage, it does the same mini stance, it does the same soul shard generation given to you. It's the same, it just lasts less. This turned out to be quite a big problem, because as we see in evidence number 1 over here, this one is the duration of Reign of Chaos, of the buff you gain whenever an Infernal is out. The Reign of Chaos is the buff that makes it so that whenever an Infernal is out, you have a chance, a 15% chance, whenever you spend a Soul Shard, to summon an extra Infernal. So this was available, of course, when you casted your Summon Infernal. This green line over here, the Infernal is summoned and your Reign of Chaos buff is present. Infernal is summoned, Reign of Chaos buff is present. The problem is that even here, in your teal colored damage, which is done by your Blasphemy, Reign of Chaos was still active. This is why, of course, because even though the talent itself is referring to when an Infernal is active, it was also working for Blasphemies, for your tier set bonus mini Infernal. This allowed Warlocks to have a much higher Soul Shard generation than normal. This looks even tamer than what it actually is, because this is a single target fight. This is Colex, so there is only one target and there is far less of a Rain of Fire spam available here to see. We will see a much clearer example in Mythic Plus of this, but that was the main crux of the problem, the fact that with Blasphemies counting as Infernals, they counted for the Reign of Chaos Soul Shards buffs, which granted you the ability to do things like these in Mythic Plus, in AoE. You had so many Soul Shard gains, because you were spending so many Soul Shards, because your Rain of Fire was hitting so many enemies, which was giving you so many Soul Shards back, which you could spend so many of in more Rain of Fires. Reign of Chaos was proccing a lot of times, giving you a bunch of procs of Blasphemy, etc, etc, etc. It was a big problem in AoE. We have talked about this before, about the issue of the, I guess, overpoweredness of destruction in AoE situations. So it was finally nerfed. Blizzard, as a result, has been trying to give compensation buffs to their single target, because they wanted to nerf just their AoE, but this nerf is of course going to touch their single target as well, because their Blasphemies and their Infernals are still doing damage in single targets, so this one would nerf it as well. So Blizzard, as a counterweight, is trying to buff pretty much all of their single target abilities. So Chaos Bolt gets buffed by 5%, Incinerate and Immolate get buffed in damage by 20%, and Conflagrate gets buffed by 10% in damage. Now, these might seem like very large numbers, but they will amount to just about nothing in the end. If you look at this damage profile on a pure single target boss like Skolex, you will see that if you take 5% of the damage of Chaos Bolt and then 20% of the damage of Incinerate and Immolate and then 10% of the damage of Conflagrate, and you put them together, you get roughly a 5 to 5.5% damage increase given to Destruction Warlock. Now, what is sad is that 5 to 5.5% damage increase is going to be the same or even less damage than you are going to be losing by nerfing the Blasphemy spawns with Reign of Chaos. So effectively, the single target gets a counterbalance set of buffs, which will very likely still end up with Destruction having less single target damage than they have now. The main point, of course, is obviously just the AoE damage, right? The AoE damage nerf. Now, before we go into detail as to what this might mean and what possible complaints we have seen already about this nerf to Destruction, there are 3 more specs to talk about that have received some changes. One is a very brief to talk about because one is Affliction Warlock. Affliction Warlock is receiving a flat out 5% more damage increase to all of their abilities. Well, Affliction Warlock is currently one of the least played specs in the game in both activities, whether it is Mythic Plus or it is Red Encounters. It is very, very underplayed. Now, we did see a similar tiny buff before and we laughed at it because Beast Mastery, for example, only received a 3% damage increase buff to all abilities, for example, in single target. Yet, thanks to that, mostly thanks to that, has gotten much more popular in the raid. So perhaps this 5% all damage buff to Affliction might also make them rise. Now, unfortunately, the difference perhaps is that Hunter didn't also have 2 super powerful and popular specs like Demonology and Destruction to compete with. So I don't think that because of this, I don't think Affliction will actually go anywhere, even given this damage increase buff. Now, we have 2 more buffs, this time around being given to tanks, as we mentioned. One is to Guardian and one is to Vengeance. Now, Blizzard has identified these 2 tanks as the tanks that have been left behind a little bit more when it comes to damage. They are lacking a little bit more on damage, in particular in single target damage. They can get away in their AoE phases, Druid with Incarnation, of course, and the spamming of Thrash. Vengeance Demon Hunter in AoE can get away with Spirit Bomb, Immolation Aura, and Fell Devastation to do decent AoE damage. Still not good, but acceptable. But the single target is much more of an issue. So, buffs in question. Guardian Druid is getting Mangle and auto attack damage increased by 10%. And Vengeance Demon Hunter is getting all damage increased by 3%, is getting Fracture or Shear, depending if you're taking the talent, damage increased by 20%, and auto attack damage also increased by 10%. Now, of course, the TLDR of this is that these buffs are laughable. This is, for example, a Vengeance Demon Hunter on a pure single target boss fight like Skolex. You take the melee damage, you take the fracture damage, and then you take the 3% flat overall damage increase, and it totals out to be somewhere in the 4 to 5% damage increase to the single target of Vengeance. And then you can look at Guardian, which is perhaps even worse, because Guardian's damage increase is to auto attack and mangle. So you look at the damage of mangle in single target, you look at the single target auto attack, the melee damage, and again the damage increase is somewhere in the 3 to 3.5% damage increase. So the difference is quite laughable because overall it's not going to amount to much. You know, if we go back to Skolex, for example, you can see that these are the top damages of Druid in this 7 to 8,000 damage range, and then you go to Protection Paladin on Skolex, and Protection Paladin is comfortably in the 11,000 range in single target damage. And then to finish it, we can just go to Blood Death Knight, and Blood Death Knight on Skolex is in the 11.5 to 12,000 damage. So when Druid is at 7 to 7.5 and is effectively 4 to 5,000 DPS behind Prot Paladin or Blood DK, even Brewmaster Monk is actually on this level. Is 10% more damage to mangle and 10% more damage to auto attacks going to do anything to fix this? Of course not. Of course, this is completely irrelevant, and it's mostly just a placebo effect buff to make them feel good, but it's not really going to change any of the issues these 2 tanks in particular, Vengeance and Guardian, have, or have had for a while now, which is a quite confusing set of buffs. You know, they would have had to significantly increase these numbers, something like 30 to 40% to even start being reasonable in terms of increasing their damage for both Guardian and Vengeance. So quite disappointed by these two tank buffs, and of course also disappointed by the buffs to Affliction, also disappointed by the lack of buffs to other specs like Shadow Priest, like Retribution Paladin, like Feral Druid. But for now we can finish the video by talking about the other spec in this video, which is Destruction, that we started with. Because there have been actually quite some complaints about these set of nerfs. Now, many people were asking for them, many people thought Destruction was overtuned, but we have gotten the, so to speak, 1%. We've gotten quite a few people at the top complaining about the set of nerfs to Destruction because they are too late. Because the nerfs to Destruction are happening, for example, in the week of the beginning of the MDI, which means teams have gotten together, have trained routes and compositions with a unnerfed Destruction Warlock in mind, and then they will have to deal with now a severely nerfed Destruction Warlock in AoE. You have gotten players, you know, the complaint is that players have spent effort and time into growing their Destruction Warlock, into pushing Destruction Warlock, and now with this nerf, it is going to severely hamper the possibilities of pushing keys. I mentioned this when talking about nerfs, that one of the issues, for example, was going to be that players that got to push keys in the 31, 32 level, even the few world records of 33 keys completed, once this nerf goes live, they will very likely no longer be able to reach this level, because that level was only reachable by pre-nerf Destruction Warlock. So now the Destruction Warlock gets nerfed, now it might also de-incentivize, discourage players who were thinking about pushing, players who were trying to push, whether it was from 3.3 to 3.6 thousand rating, or from 3.6 to 3.8, or for 3.8 to 4k rating. All of them might get a much less of an incentive, of an excitement in trying to push, because they know they will be handicapped. They know they won't have the same power of the Destruction Warlock that everyone else had at their disposal for the last 3 months. That is one of the main sources of complaint given these nerfs. The nerfs are okay, the nerfs are good, and nobody is debating whether or not the nerfs were needed. They were certainly needed for Destruction Warlock. The main source of debate is rather the timing. Why is it coming so late? Why is it coming so randomly? Why is it coming at the start of the MDI tournament, for example? That is more of the scope of the complaints at the moment. I am partially in favor of these complaints. I understand the grievances that some players might have had and will have with this very late nerf to Destruction Warlock, but in the end I have to put the two things on a scale, right? And I have to balance the annoyance and the problems caused by an incredibly overpowered spec for hundreds of thousands of players, and then put it on the same scale of the grievances and annoyances that nerfing this very overpowered spec is going to cause all of the 200 people above 3.8 thousand rating that will feel like their pushing chances have gotten lower with the nerf of Destruction. You know, I have to put them in the scale, and next to each other, the normies, okay? The 99% ends up winning, because this is just going to make it much more bearable for everyone in the ecosystem of Mythic Plus to make it into a key over a Destruction Warlock much more easily than what we have gotten up to this point, even if it is sadly at the cost of some of the more hardcore, some of the more competitive group of players that would have wanted to have the chance to play with this power of Destruction for a little bit more. I think that overall this, even though I still think it's a little bit late for this type of nerf to come in, I think it was supposed to happen like 2 months ago, but even with coming this late, I still prefer it to not come in at all. You know, I've read some people saying at this point just leave Destruction as is until Season 4. No. If I had to choose between a nerf, I would rather have it earlier rather than later. So, despite the problems that this might cause, I still think it is still not something that you can keep pushing for later and later and later. I think that the earlier the better. I'm sorry for the players who will feel like they got cucked by Destruction getting nerfed now, but you knew it, okay? You knew it was OP, you played it anyways, you knew a nerf was going to come, okay? You were on the fence all this time on playing this type of spec. So now that the nerf has come, you have to suck it up. You have to either continue playing it, because it will still be, by the way, the strongest spec in Mythic Plus, very likely. That's how far out of reach from everyone else it was. Or you can just reroll to yet another Flavor of the Month spec. It's gonna be your choice anyways. So with this set of news about the balance tuning being done, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your Sunday. Let me guys know, of course, what you think about these set of balance tuning. No need to shit on the two poor tanks not getting buffed enough. No need to mock the poor Affliction Warlock. I am more interested on your take about the Destruction Warlock nerfs. If they are too little, if they are too much, if they are too late, or if they are too early because you too wanted them to be done in Season 4 rather than now. I'm gonna wait to hear your take. For now, we can stop here. Thank you, of course, guys, for watching the video and for helping to grow the channel, which also includes liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel. No Flavor of the Month rerollers allowed to subscribe for today, so no Destruction Warlocks and no Survival Hunters allowed to subscribe. I am also available to be found on Twitter down in this general direction, and you can also support me even more by going on my Patreon at this name over here. For even further support, it would be much appreciated. With that being said, thank you guys again. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, no joke, I do still believe they will actually remain the meta-est spec in Mythic Plus anyways. That's how crazy they were. Oh man.